So trust me, stay away from that top quadrant, straight in front of the bar. The thing is with new chainsaw users, they don't respect the dirt enough. Pop, pop, you know, this is the number one thing. When you're using a chainsaw. Hello and welcome to climbingarborist.com. My name is Dan Holliday, and in this video I'm going to teach you some basic but really useful tips on using a chainsaw. Who is this video for, you might ask? So this video is for new people in the tree work industry, inexperienced people with chainsaws, homeowners that have chainsaws that do a little bit of bucking of wood here and there, anybody who can use a chainsaw a little bit but hasn't really had much experience or hasn't had people teach them a few little tips here and there. This video is not like a starter how to use a chainsaw if you've never touched one, seen one, anything like that. I'm not going to go through every little step on how to use them, but I'm going to give you some basic tips, and hopefully everybody that watches this will at least learn something from one of the tips you might not have known.
Hello.
One of the important things is obviously you always want to have a sharp chain, right? But there's no point in saying that if you don't know how to recognize a sharp chain. I've done a video on basic chainsaw sharpening and like how to recognize if you saw sharp or not, because the thing is, you can have the best chainsaw engine, chainsaw body in the world, but if you've got a blunt chain, it's going to be absolutely useless. And if you just try and persist with it, not only is it going to be bad for the saw, bad for the engine, bad for like the mounts, anti-vibration mounts, but just bad for everything, every part of the chainsaw. It's also going to be bad for you, your body. You're going to be putting your lower back under a lot of strain. You're going to be pushing. You're going to be doing all that kind of stuff that doesn't need to be done because you've got a blunt chain. The edge of the chain should be pristine, no imperfections, no little bits of light glistening which can show you the slight edge has gone. It should be the exact same all the way from the back to the front. It should look the same color. The edge should be sharp, all that kind of stuff. Another sub tip on top of that, part of having a sharp chain is the depth gauges. So the depth gauge is the little piece of metal in front of the actual cutting tooth. So the depth gauge is there to decide how much of a shaving the chainsaw is going to take every time that cutter tooth passes. So if the depth gauge is too low, so you've sharpened it too much, the saw is going to be like really chattery. It's going to grab all the time. It's not going to be comfortable to use a lot of the time. If it's grabbing too much, then you have to slightly lift the saw out of the wood because it's grabbing too hard, because it'll grab, and if the depth gauges are too low, it'll grab so hard it'll stop the chain, and then you'll lift it out, it'll stop the chain, lift it out. That kind of is counterproductive because then you're using your own strength, your own weight to lift it back out. If the depth gauge is not taken down enough, it's going to be taking like either nothing off every time that cutter tooth passes, or it's going to be taking such a little amount off, it's not going to cut through easily and fast. It's going to feel like it's blunt even if the cutter tooth is sharp, because it's basically just taking dust off. It's just like rubbing against the surface. So depth gauge. The next thing is the chain tension. Before you even use a saw, you want to make sure that the tension of the chain is right. So a good simple way to do that is the chain shouldn't be sagging below the bar. You shouldn't be able to see any gap between the chain and the bottom of the bar. If you can see a gap, then it's too loose, but you don't want it too tight. If it's too tight, then when you go to try and move the chain, do this with gloves on, you won't be able to pull it because it'll be far too tight, and then the engine's going to have to work harder. It's going to cause a lot of heat build up on the bar, and it'll end up ruining the bar. So it wants to be hand. You want to be able to move it by hand. So you want to be able to do that with it. So no gap at the bottom, but you want to be able to move it by hand. When it comes to tensioning your chain, loosen off the nuts, and And then what I always do, which is something a lot of people don't, and I feel like it just helps save the chain go slacker quicker, is there's play in the bar. So if you just take the play out of the bar, so lift it up at the nose, and then do your chain tension. Yeah, that's good. And then tighten up the nuts again. Then off to the races. Starting procedure. So 2 safe ways to start a chainsaw. You don't want to be like swinging it around like this and chopping your toe off as you start it. Oh, you don't want to be doing that either. You want to either put it on the ground and put your right foot on the fat bit of the rear handle so it's nice and stable, and then just start it like that. The other safe way to do it is have it between your legs, and squeeze in between your legs and squeeze the saw, have your left hand on the handle and do it that way. So either way is good. Okay, so now I'll start it on the ground. Just make sure the chain brake's on. And the next thing is, a lot of chainsaws will have a little button on the top here. That's a decompression button. So what that does, it takes some of the effort out of pull starting the saw. Now this is a MS261. On a small saw like this, you shouldn't ever really need to use this. Well, I mean, for homeowners maybe, or somebody who's not got very much strength, you might want to use that. But mainly you will want to use those on bigger saws. So I have a MS880 that I use for milling wood, and that thing is an absolute bitch to try and start like the first time of the day. So I'd definitely push that button in, and then it just makes pulling it over a little bit easier. So on the 880 I'll pretty much use that button every time. I have a 572 Husqvarna. I don't ever really use the button on that saw either. So on the small saws, or on all saws, most saws, if you see a button on the top, it's a decompression button, but on small saws you shouldn't really need to use it. So now we've covered all of that stuff before you even use a saw. Everybody who's a chainsaw user, this is the number one thing. When you're using a chainsaw, you've got to treat this chain like it's like the chain is God. You want to keep it sharp always. That's the goal, is whenever you're using a chainsaw, is to keep this chain from ever going blunt. Now that's impossible, but if you're careful, you can go a long time, and I'm meaning, I don't know, like months without sharpening the chain if you're like super vigilant, super careful. So what makes a blunt chain? Well, what makes a blunt chain is the dirt. Anything other than wood, so like soil, because it'll have like tiny bits of grit in it. That, like, soil is the number one enemy, really. Like dirt is the number one enemy, because it's always going to be around when you're bucking up wood, when you're cutting, when you're using a chainsaw. Obviously things like concrete, metal, you'll come across metal in trees every now and again. It's just one of those things, people hammering nails to trees and stuff. So everything that you can avoid, if you know there's metal in there, if you can see there's been nails hammered in, if you're working around concrete, if you're working around a tree at the base, around soil, just spend the time to dig around. And I don't just mean if there's like a bunch of soil, just like scoop it away and then that's good enough. No, even like the traces of soil on the bark. So either get a leaf blower and like really go at it, and then maybe even if you need to get a stump down low, sometimes you even got to scrape the bark, so you take the surface layer of the bark off. Like the lengths that you can go to stop hitting dirt is usually going to save you time in the long run. And the thing is, with new chainsaw users, they just don't appreciate and they don't respect the dirt enough, like what a tiny bit of dirt will do to a chainsaw. So don't hit the dirt. That is number one. Just stay away from the dirt. So when you're bucking up wood, so say if this was like a, I don't know, like 20-foot long trunk that you've just dropped, I will make all my cuts from the top, as long as it's just laying on the ground, all my cuts from the top about I don't know, like 7/8 of the way through or something like that. And then once I've done all of them, or once I've done them, because the thing is, you don't want to like risk trying to go through, because you're like, oh, I think it's not quite touching the ground, I'll risk trying to get through it. You don't want to try and go all the way through and then just nick that little bit of soil, and then you do the same on the next cut, the same on the next cut, and before you know it, you've got blunt saw. So do all the cuts, and then get something, if you've got like a PV to like flip the whole trunk over, if it's light enough that you can do it by hand. If you can leave a peg like from a branch on it and use that to like roll it over, just kind of look along it and make sure there's no like rocks, stones, chunks of metal, dirt along where you're going to be cutting. Obviously there's going to be dirt underneath, but you can just have a quick glance, a quick check that where there's nothing big sticking up. Say even if there's a big rock here, if your bar's long enough, then that's going to be in the way. So it's good to go along and just like get everything out of the way so you can just run along it. And then do all the cuts, flip it over, and then all you got to do is like whip the top cuts out. Right, and then just flip that over to where you can kind of see both sides. And each time you come to pull the saw out, just wait for the saw chain to stop spinning, and then move on. Don't pull it out and it's all spinning and catch something. The next tip, so you're on the ground bucking up, or you stood up bucking up, depending on how big the wood is. You don't want to be right in front of the bar, like head right straight in front of the bar. You want to keep your head off to the side, so in case there is any kickback. And what kickback is where the bar of the chain and the chain hit something. Usually kickback is caused by hitting something with the upper quarter of the nose of the bar. So if it were to kick back and the saw comes back here, your head is out of the way. You don't want to be staring down the barrel of the saw and so head's out of the way. So keep your head to the side, and it's quite easy to do because obviously the bar is quite offset anyway. So as long as you kind of cut in there, you don't need to be staring down the middle. You can look off to the side. So pop, 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 pop. If it kicks back, then it's off to the side. A tip following on from that is kickback itself. So always avoid using the top quarter of the nose of the bar. That's really important. And that's something that new users of a chainsaw won't typically know. So avoid, I mean, really, like when you're using the nose of the bar, that's kind of like almost getting to like advanced use of a chainsaw, like plunge cutting in. You only want to do that when you're actually comfortable using the saw. So just avoid kind of cutting with the nose in the first place, really. If you have to, make sure it's the bottom quarter, because using that top part of the saw, say if you're down here and for whatever reason you touch the nose there, poof, it will kick. And not only can it come for your face, it can like sprain your wrist, because it like the kickback happens so fast and you're not expecting it. That's why I'm not even going to show you what kickback looks like, because you know, I don't know if it's gonna like kick back at me and like kick my wrist back and like break my wrist or something. So trust me, stay away from that top quadrant. If you're new to using it, stay away from plunge cutting in general.
If you've not heard or used chip drop, then this could really help. Chip drop is exactly what it suggests. It finds you convenient places to drop your wood chip, very cheap or even for free. Not only does it save you cost on dump fees, but chip drop saves you travel time and fuel costs. The website is super simple and easy to use. Click the special link, sign up, and find your next drop site.
When you're bucking up wood, or when you're cutting anything, you know, of a decent size, you want to make sure you use the dogs of the saw. So the dogs of the saw are like are these things here. These are called the dogs, and what that enables you to do is you want to use it as like a pivot point. So if you've got a sharp chain, the chain will pull the body of the saw into the wood. So if you're I'll spin this to the side. If you're cutting this bit of wood, you want to put the body of the saw up against the bit of wood. Start cutting, and as you start cutting, the chain will constantly like pull the body into the wood, and then you don't actually stick the dogs in like that, but as you start cutting, you then start using the dogs as like a pivot point. So you pivot, put the nose down, come down with the body, pivot, and like that. As you are pivoting down, just keep an eye on the nose of the bar. Like just make sure you don't pivot it into the soil, because that's easy. It's easy to be looking at like what you're cutting and then pivoting the nose of the bar into the soil. You always want to use the chain and the dogs to do the work and pivot. That basically means that you can work for longer without getting as fatigued, because the saw is resting on the wood, so you're only having to hold a portion of the weight of the body. You're not having to lean into it. You're not holding the saw up and away and then pushing down. You're not forcing down. You're just resting the saw, pivoting. So let the saw do the work. And that's another thing about having a sharp chain. If you've got a blunt chain, you have to force it in, and then you're becoming fatigued. And all the things we've spoken about already, you become fatigued, you're wearing the saw, you're wearing your body, you're going to have to sharpen it again anyway. So sharpen it, don't use a blunt chain. And that comes back to understanding what makes a sharp chain in the first place, because if you don't do that, then you can't sharpen the chain, etc, etc. So when you come to do all the tops as you flipped over the piece, I've said don't use the top edge of the nose of the bar. Obviously for this you need to use the top of the bar, so push it in quite a bit so that you're basically getting the edge of where it needs cutting. Like the strap that you've left is going to be touching, I don't know, here somewhere, and you've got more of an angle so the top is away from the wood, so it looks like you might be cutting with the nose of the bar, but as long as your bar is in far enough, then you're actually using like this part of the saw, of the chain, to use to nip those little straps off. Now if your chain gets like jammed up with wood chip, with something that it pulls in, usually wood chip, if it gets jammed up, the first thing that I'll always do to see if I can alleviate the problem is make sure the chain brake is off, and then just put the chain on the edge, like on a corner, so on the edge of the log, and then pull it back like that. And if it's only just caught a little bit, it might be too much for the engine to get the chain spinning, but it's quite easy to pull it back like that. Most of the time that will work. Only really if like for some reason the bar's seized or the chain's somehow popped off the sprocket or something, that won't work. But usually, and you can, I don't know, you can be a bit rough as well. If a first pull like that doesn't loosen it, then you can get a little bit more rough to try and get some movement, as long as you've seen that the chain's still on the sprocket, still on the bar and everything like that. Another tip I've got for you: if you've dropped a tree, or if you've dropped a stem or portion of a tree and it's laying on something else like this, typically if the tip's laying on something and then you've got the whole rest of the stem down there and it's like off the ground, that means that the upper side of the bit of wood is going to be under compression. Okay, so that means that if you start cutting down like this from the top side, you'll get like halfway maybe a little touch more through, and then it will trap your saw, your bar and your chain, and then your bar and your chain is going to be stuck. If you've not got another chainsaw, then you're hooped and you're going to have to get your mate to come and help you. Another tip using a chainsaw is you'll see that chainsaws have like a line down here. Now this isn't just a join of the plastic or whatever, this is a sight line. So you can use that if you fell in a tree. you can use that as an aim, right? Where is it pointing? That's where the face cut is going to be pointing if I hold it at this angle. So use that as a sight line. Just another helpful part of the chainsaw that you can make use of. There you go. Hopefully that was useful. Hopefully there's a good couple of tips in there for you, and you don't need to get your mate Billy Boy round to do some chainsawing for you. Thank you very much for watching, and get out there, get practicing. Be safe though, take it easy. Slowly get familiar with the saw. Nothing happens overnight. It took me ages to gain experience and safe handling of a chainsaw. They're a deadly weapon, so take it easy.